For the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, my very good friend, the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on House Resolution 456.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Rules Committee met and reported out a rule. House Resolution 456, providing for consideration of H.R. 3746, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, under a closed rule. It provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Ways and Means. It provides for 1 motion to recommit. I rise today in support of the rule and the underlying legislation. Mr. Speaker, today's legislation has been a long time coming. An agreement like the one we're considering today could and should have been in place much earlier. Instead, President Biden dithered and refused to negotiate with House Republicans, pushing us right up to the very brink of catastrophic default. From day one, Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans tried to get President Biden and congressional Democrats to come to the negotiating table, but for months they refused. Over and over again, President Biden refused to meet with Speaker McCarthy to discuss the debt limit and the budget. He insisted over and over again that it was his way or the highway, and he told us over and over again that the only thing he would accept was a clean debt ceiling increase. It was that or nothing. Of course, it's easy to understand why President Biden wouldn't want to talk about cutting spending. Just look at the spending record he's amassed. Since he took office, President Biden and congressional Democrats have increased the 10-year spending trajectory by $10 trillion. They did this by passing a partisan reconciliation bill that spent $1.9 trillion, and then by passing another partisan reconciliation bill that added up to another $600 billion in new spending. And President Biden himself issued executive orders that added $1.5 trillion in spending, including his reckless and unconstitutional $400 billion plan to cancel student loan debt. When you lay it out like that, it's easy to see how we've reached the statutory debt ceiling so quickly. And it's easy to see why President Biden and congressional Democrats wouldn't want any barriers to spending more and more money. They want the gravy train to keep flowing and the spending to keep increasing, which will ultimately lead to the nation further and further into debt. But House Republicans disagreed, and last month we acted. We passed the Limit, Save, Grow Act, a bill that responsibly lifts the debt ceiling and changes the trajectory of future spending downward. We agreed that the United States cannot, should not, and will not default on our national debt, but we also put forward clear, common sense, and responsible savings that will bring reckless spending under control. And what did Democrats do? Nothing. Not a thing. Not a single Democrat in the House voted to lift the debt ceiling. Not a single House Democrat voted to save trillions of dollars over the next 10 years. Our friends in the Senate, which is controlled by the Democrats, refused to take up the Limit, Save, Grow Act. And to this day, the Senate has refused to pass any bill lifting the debt limit, not one. But House Republicans have. For all the posturing on the other side of the aisle, I would remind everyone that House Republicans are the only ones who've taken up concrete action to avoid default. And President Biden's refusal to negotiate for so long was what brought us so close to the brink of a catastrophic default in the first place. But having said all that, today we're bringing a bill to the floor that will resolve this crisis. This bill is the result of negotiations between President Biden and House Republicans. It is not a perfect bill, but it does represent a compromise between the administration and Congress that's necessary in divided government. Nobody got everything they wanted, but the end result is a truly historic bill. Consider what the bill does, Mr. Speaker. It responsibly lifts the debt ceiling through January 1st, 2025. In exchange, it also puts in place a series of fiscal reforms that will save taxpayers money. For the first time in history, we are pairing a debt ceiling increase with a year-over-year decrease in spending. We will be spending less in fiscal year 2024 than we are in fiscal year 2023, something that's never happened before in conjunction with a debt ceiling increase. And we accomplished that goal while preserving funding for our national defense and ensuring our veterans get the care they need and deserve. We have also clawed back $28 billion in unspent COVID pandemic relief dollars that are no longer needed, the largest rescission in history. We have cut $1.4 billion that President Biden and congressional Democrats want to give to the IRS for new agents. We will cap further spending at just 1% growth per year for the next 6 years. And we accomplish all of this without including any new taxes or new government programs, rejecting President Biden's demands to charge hardworking Americans another $5 trillion in taxes. But that's not all this bill does. It includes real policy victories, Mr. Speaker, that will improve the lives of everyday Americans. The bill includes the first major reforms to work requirements for SNAP and TANF, ensuring that we can lift people on these programs out of poverty and into the workforce. The bill also includes major permitting reform provisions, reducing approval times for essential infrastructure and energy projects. None of this would have happened but for President Biden's decision to come to the table and negotiate. And none of this would have happened but for House Republicans doing the responsible thing and insisting on fiscal reforms. Together, we're doing something good for the nation. We're avoiding a devastating default on the national debt, and we're enacting needed fiscal reforms to put us on a more sustainable spending path. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves.